Good day, everybody. This is Dr. Durga Sabnis, and welcome to Enago Academy's webinar series. In today's webinar, we will be discussing how you can effectively avoid plagiarism and ensure reproducibility. This webinar will be conducted by a very experienced biomedical researcher who works with Enago Academy, Dr. Nikhil Gokhale, who shall share his insights on the topic. So, Dr. Gokhale, whenever you are ready.
Thanks, Dr. Durga. So welcome to Enago Academy's webinar on avoiding plagiarism and ensuring reproducibility. Before we proceed with the webinar, we need to do a quick sound check. So is everybody able to hear me clearly? If you're able to hear me clearly, just type yes in the chat box. So we'll await your responses. As soon as you say yes, we'll start with the webinar. Is everybody able to hear me clearly? Is the audio okay? Fantastic. Okay, that's fantastic. So everybody is able to hear me clearly. There are no audio issues. All right, so welcome once again, and let's continue with the webinar. So today we'll be mostly discussing, this particular topic, which is of great importance: how to avoid plagiarism and ensure experimental reproducibility. So first of all, let's have a look at the agenda for today. We'll be discussing the publish or perish model. We'll try to understand its meaning. Then we'll try to understand what it means by authenticity, accuracy, and originality. What are the definitions, and why are these terms important? Then we'll have a quick look at some of the research and publication ethics and why we should care about these ethics. We'll discuss something more on plagiarism and reproducibility. Then we'll share some tips on how to avoid plagiarism and how to ensure reproducibility. All right, so once again, welcome to the webinar, and let's continue. All right, so as you may be aware, researchers continually need to publish in high impact journals, and there's always an incentive to publish. Universities and institutes always make it compulsory for researchers to publish in decent journals, and it is required for their promotion, so forth and so on. So it is really important for researchers to ensure that they publish in reputed journals. Unless and until they do that, it is difficult for them to progress in their career. So that is what we mean by the publish or perish model. Now, this success is really important not only for the researcher, but also for his or her host institute. Because as you may be aware, there is something called as an H-index. H-index is not applicable just to individuals. It can be applicable, it can be made applicable to institutes, individuals, as well as countries. So if a researcher publishes in a good journal and he or she gets enough citations, that definitely helps boost the H-index of the individual researcher as well as the H-index of his or her host institution. And that is exactly why there is a lot of incentive, and the institutes basically encourage their researchers to publish in decent journals. Now, unfortunately, the flip side of this is that this pressure sometimes results into undesirable consequences. Some of these include unusually long papers, then something called as salami slicing of papers, then something as serious as scientific misconduct, also known as research fraud. And at sometimes, people also tend to include a large number of authors, although not all of them seem to have contributed to the study. Now, here's an example. a few years ago, Harvard Medical School had to pay $10 million towards settlement because of research misconduct. So research misconduct can really have terrible consequences. So before we proceed, let me highlight a key aspect here. Now, let's say a researcher A wants to publish his paper in journal B, and instead of publishing his or her paper in one journal, he or she decides to slice it into two pieces, although it's not necessary. Such an act is called as a salami slicing of papers. Now, sometime back when I was working in a private university, I was working as the associate director of their PhD program. One fine day, a student came to my office and asked me whether it was okay to slice his research paper into two and submit it to two different journals. The reason he quoted was that he wanted to earn more citations. So basically, instead of getting a paper published in one journal and getting like 10 citations, he wanted to publish it in two and get like 20 or more citations. So I basically congratulated him for that and for the fantastic idea, but also mentioned that it was unethical. And the reason for that is because you simply cannot slice papers like that into two unless it is really required. You cannot synthetically split pieces that are so identical into two pieces just because you need more citations. So that's what we mean by salami slicing, and it is an unfortunate consequence of this publish or perish model. So this is just one example that I wanted to highlight. Another really drastic consequence of the publish or perish model is a research fraud or scientific misconduct. And you see that many times. Lately I've seen some really good universities getting involved in such kind of a fraud. I mean, not like directly, but because of the involvement of some researchers who basically did not represent facts accurately. So basically, these are some of the flip sides, and Dr. Durga, who is an expert in oncology, will share a few insights on these topics. So, Dr. Durga.
So yeah, Nikhil, what we see nowadays is that a lot of papers have several authors, which a lot of times is almost like more than 20 or 30. I think this is okay if it is actually a multi-institutional study or the paper or the study requires that sort of expertise, technical expertise, etc. However, what is also rampant in nowadays is gift authorship, wherein authors, scientists will give somebody or grant somebody authorship just to please them or to make the peer review process slightly easier to expedite it. So I think that is quite unethical. Also, sometimes in an attempt to publish in higher impact factor journals or better journals, people will just put set of results together. As when you try to publish a manuscript, it is very essential that it is a coherent study. It's a coherent piece of work. So there is no point just putting sets of results together so that so that you have enough data to go to a better journal. You should ensure, as I said, that there is a flow, the study flows from one result to another. And finally, salami slicing, which I think Nikhil will discuss in detail in a bit, but again, quite a common form of ethical misconduct, wherein researchers, in order to publish in several journals at the same time or to increase the number of journals that they can publish in, they will divide coherent study into several small slices, or they'll slice it into several parts and publish each of these parts in different journals. Again, not a very ethical way of going about things. So I think this is quite rampant in science nowadays, and it should not be, because I think it defeats the purpose of doing research in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely true. So basically, we need to ensure that we comply with all the ethics and the norms that are prescribed by various bodies such as COPE. Now let's discuss authenticity, accuracy, and originality in detail. So what do we mean by authenticity? So let's say you're a researcher and you're trying to publish your paper in a journal. The very first thing that you need to do, or the very first thing that you need to ensure, is to present a complete account of your research findings. So you cannot partially present whatever you deem fit, or whatever you think is convenient for you, and then hide the rest, because that would introduce a huge bias. So you have to completely present an honest account, a complete account of your findings. Besides that, you also need to provide data with sufficient detail, so that if somebody tries to reproduce your set of experiments, they are able to do that successfully. Now, you'll be shocked to know that there was a recent paper, a recent survey carried out by Nature, and what they found that scientists were not able to reproduce more than 70% of the published papers. Because of several reasons, and this is really shocking. Now, of course, the reasons were not the same. There were various reasons, but this is basically why we all need to ensure that we provide sufficient experimental details, sufficient details related to experimental methods and protocols, so that others who want to reproduce these experiments in their laboratories are able to do so successfully. So that is what we mean by authenticity. Now, is it enough if we just ensure authenticity? Not really. We also need to ensure that all of our data is accurate. We need to ensure that all data, materials, and methods are accurately described. We should avoid manipulation of images. Digitally altering images is not an ethical practice. We also need to provide an accurate description below each image. So, like for example, if let's say I'm looking at figure 1.1, I'm having a look at the caption. That caption needs to basically incorporate every single detail, and ideally I shouldn't be looking at the text. If I look at the figure and the caption, that should be good enough for my understanding. So we need to provide an accurate description of images. We cannot partially provide information, hide information that we find inconvenient. And this is happening more and more these days. People not only do that, but they also alter images digitally, and we'll talk about that later. And lastly, we also need to ensure that wherever there are numbers, we use the appropriate statistical procedures, because experiments and data and numbers without statistics mean really nothing. So we need to really ensure that we incorporate the right statistical procedures. All right, so now that we have covered authenticity and accuracy, let's talk about originality. Now, if you're trying to publish your manuscript in a journal, you simply cannot republish something which has already been published elsewhere. So that is not ethical. Then, of course, you cannot submit the same manuscript to two different journals. Like, let's say I want to publish a paper in either Cell Science or Nature. I cannot submit it to Cell Science and Nature all at the same time and then just wait for the outcome. That's not ethical. You need to basically submit your manuscript only to one journal at a time, and then wait. So that's one thing. And then finally, you cannot divide one modest size research project into multiple papers, just like we mentioned before, salami slicing. That is also an unethical practice. I'll tell you why. Here's the practical reason. I mean, there are several reasons, but the most practical reason, let's discuss it quickly. So let's say I'm trying to access a paper. I log into PubMed and I'm able to download a paper, and it only presents half the facts, and half the facts are buried in another paper which is not there in the same journal. So I have to now look up two different journal articles, and that unnecessarily increases my time, and then I have to take a lot of effort. So basically, that is what is the flip side of salami slicing. You don't want to get involved in salami slicing. And basically, if a project is a modest size project and it need not be divided into two, then you probably shouldn't be doing that. Now, moving ahead, let's see what we mean by research and publication ethics, and why we should care at all. Now, compliance with ethics is not an optional thing, it's really mandatory. We need to ensure compliance with all of these guidelines, because otherwise the credibility of the research community will be in jeopardy. Uh, we also need to ensure fair treatment to humans and animals and guarantee authenticity of published research. And as a result of all of these, society and industry, they benefit in some way or the other. So we have to constantly ensure that whatever we publish brings in enough benefits to society and industry. And if we publish something which is fraudulent or something that is plagiarized, obviously it will not bring in any benefit to society or industry. Okay, so let's go over some examples of research misconduct. The first one here is the scandal. So there was a German physicist by the name Jan Schön. I hope I am pronouncing it correctly. And he claimed significant findings on new transistor materials. And interestingly, he got listed as an author on one new published paper every 8 days on an average, which is really surprising. But what happened is, when other scientists tried to reproduce his experiments, they found that all of his data were heavily fabricated. So he basically did data fabrication and image manipulation in almost all of his papers. So 28 of his articles got retracted, and 7 were retracted from the high-profile journal Nature and 8 from Science. So see how much money and effort went down the drain, because publishing one paper in Nature takes a lot of effort, and people look forward to using the published protocols in their own labs. And if somebody publishes something like this, it just causes a lot of waste of human resource, effort, time, money. The National Institutes of Health, as an example, spends like billions of dollars on research funding. So just imagine a researcher getting a $1 million grant and then publishing something really unethical in a journal like Science. What a great waste of money and resources. So that's basic reason why we need to avoid such kind of unethical practices. So there's one more example. In December 2009, this particular journal was forced to retract 70 papers because they clearly found evidence of major scientific fraud. And then this particular university from China fired 2 researchers. And look at the statistics. Out of 164 articles that were published by researchers from this university, 92 were retracted. This is a really shocking statistic, and we don't want to work at a place that basically has such issues. So I'm not sure what exactly happened at the university, whether it was the researcher who was who was to blame or something else. But such things need to be avoided. We cannot simply engage in any kind of research misconduct, regardless of the environment or anything else. All right, having said that, let's try to distinguish between fabrication and falsification. So the basic difference between fabrication and falsification is, when people try to make up data, when they try to cook up data, that is something that comes under fabrication. Whereas falsification is the intentional altering of data. So let's say somebody does image manipulation, or they basically generate numbers in an Excel sheet and then say that they got those numbers from an experiment. That is falsification. And both of these are to be avoided at all costs. Otherwise, just like you can see at the bottom of the slide, the paper gets retracted and it remains that way. So let's say somebody publishes a paper, you'll have that red stamp saying retracted forever on your paper, and that's not a particularly pleasurable thing. I hope the researcher here is not engaged in fabrication and falsification. So hopefully. All right. So some more data on this research misconduct in numbers. The U.S. Office of Research Integrity every year they find that 10 to 12 individuals are found guilty of research fraud. I think that number is severely underreported. Many more people are in fact involved in plagiarism and research fraud. Now, out of the 2000 plus papers that got published from 73 to 2012, approximately 43% were retracted because of research fraud or suspected fraud, which is a really shocking statistic. Now, interestingly, only 2% of scientists and trainees admit that they have fabricated, falsified, or modified data, which is also quite shocking because looking at numbers, the 2% looks like a really tiny number. All right, so moving ahead, a survey that was conducted, it included like 1,000 postdocs, and about one-fourth of them, more than one-fourth of them, admitted selecting or omitting data to improve their chances of receiving grant funding. So let's say I want to receive funding from the NIH, and then I try to submit a grant proposal and I apply for $1 million grant. Then obviously I have to submit some preliminary data, and if that data is cooked up to meet with the desired outcome, obviously it will look great on paper, but in reality it really means nothing. And unfortunately, some researchers tend to do that. They try to overemphasize or overstate their findings, and then basically NIH suffers because of that, because NIH tends to spend a lot of money on research funding, and then all that money, like in this case, how much was that? USD 57 million, which is a huge amount. $57 million, they just went down the drain because papers got retracted between 92 and 2012, allegedly because of scientific misconduct. So that's something we really do not want. All right, so what is plagiarism? Basically, it's an unethical practice. So let's say if like I come across an interesting paper and I try to copy the entire content and then sell it off as my content, and then pass it off as my work, that is basically plagiarism, and that has really serious consequences, including but not limited to job loss, then of course loss of reputation, which nobody wants, something as serious as revocation of PhD theses, and then article retractions, with that red stamp saying retracted, and it stays there forever. So it's not particularly a desirable outcome. And that's basically why we need to stay away from, refrain from plagiarizing content. Now, it is surprisingly common, and I'm quite surprised when people come asking for, looking for softwares that detect plagiarism, and really, do we seriously need to even access such softwares? Because if I'm writing something on my own, what is the probability that it will accidentally match with something that is already published? It's almost like saying that words from a dictionary will spontaneously combine to produce Shakespearean literature and match with Shakespeare's books and everything. So that's next to impossible. So basically the idea is very simple. If you try to understand what has been mentioned in the previously published paper and then convey it to your audience in your own words, there is really minimal almost no risk of plagiarism. And plagiarism can involve various forms. It could be data plagiarism, plagiarism of words and phrases, or even ideas and concepts. All right, so we'll take a small break here. We'll shift gears, and then we have with us Dr. Durga and Medha, both really diligent content team members. And Medha is currently working on an ebook titled Research and Publication Ethics. So she'll share some insights on that ebook. So welcome, Medha and Durga.
Thank you, Nikhil. So, Metha, as Nikhil said, is currently working on a very interesting piece of work, her ebook on research and publication ethics. So, tell us slightly more about your ebook, Metha.
Yes, Durga. So I'll be done compiling an ebook on research ethics very soon. Let me share a few insights with our webinar attendees. So, hello everyone. As a researcher, you may have undertaken coursework or attended few seminars, like the mandatory seminars on research ethics in your respective universities. And even today's topic, we have been discussing about the importance and why we need to adhere to research ethics, even when you are conducting research or even when you are trying to publish it. So through this ebook, we intend to provide a concise yet a comprehensive resource to graduate students and early stage researchers. So we have identified few common areas where researchers often face doubt and challenges, such as how they can avoid image manipulation or plagiarism, how to assign authorship, how they can manage their research data effectively, or how to identify conflicts of interest. So, through this ebook, we intend to provide them with ample tips that will help them to effectively handle all such situations.
That sounds really, really interesting, Medha, at least to me, and I hope it sounds the same to you guys, because I feel like it'll be extremely useful, if you're carrying out your research, as well as if you're planning to publish it in the near future. Also, what do you think, Medha? What would you recommend to our attendees today?
I would ensure that all attendees today make sure to visit our website, which is really comprehensive, Inago Academy. So that is inago.com/academy. And please subscribe to our newsletter. And all subscribers will receive a copy of this free ebook.
That sounds really interesting. And thank you so much, Medha.
Yes, my pleasure, Durga.
Thanks, Dr. Durga and Medha, for sharing your insights. And so let's proceed. And so before we proceed, let me quickly highlight one more aspect. We have a free Q&A forum, and if you have questions, let's say, for example, on journal selection, or you need some guidance for grant writing, you have some questions on manuscript drafting, you can shoot the questions at us. And rest assured, every single question that is sent in our direction will get answered for sure. So even after today's webinar, we would encourage all the attendees, we would encourage every single attendee to send some questions in our direction. Just visit this Q&A forum. It's completely free. We don't charge anything to you. And then you can share your questions. And then our experts on academic writing and publishing will answer your questions in a timely manner. All right, so moving ahead. Now, here are some very interesting tips on how to basically avoid plagiarism. So very first and foremost thing is, you need to understand the context. Do not copy paste, the text verbatim. Like I always tell PhD students to stay away from the Control-C and Control-V option, which is like an extremely popular option, but unfortunately that should never be used, especially when you're writing, creating original work. You can always take notes when you're reading, then try to understand the context, and then explain it to your target audience in your own words. If you do that, there's really no reason why that would suddenly match with previously published content. So the idea is really simple. Now, basically, there are some very interesting resources. So if you can go through this link. And by the way, after we finish today's webinar, you will get a link to this webinar. So you can check out this webinar video, the video corresponding to this webinar at absolutely any time in the future. It will include the visual as well as the audio content. All right, so one way to ensure that your manuscript stays free of plagiarism is to quote people accurately. So you can always use quotes, And we have an example here. Like, for example, if you're citing somebody's original work, let's say you're citing the work conducted at the Department of Health and Human Services. So this is how you do it. You say, according to DHHS, in square brackets, reference number 33, and then you insert the sentence in quotes. So if you do that, that is perfectly fine, because you're giving credit to the original stakeholder, and that's how you basically stay away from plagiarism. So that is one way. All right, so now what all do you need to cite? Do you need to cite every single thing that goes into a paper? Well, most of it, yes, but not all of it. So let's make it more clear through examples. Like any words or combinations of words or paragraphs that do not belong to you, the IPR belongs to someone else, it means that you need to cite that person. Of course, you have to cite your own material, because otherwise that would be self-plagiarism, and that is also not allowed. Although it's your own paper, still you cannot do that. There are several reasons for that, but let me highlight a reason that people usually do not highlight. So let's say I publish a paper in Nature. Uh, I hope I'm able to do that. And then next month, or probably 6 months down the line, I publish a paper in Science. And then what I do is I take some material from the Nature paper and try to put it in the Science paper. So that would be self-plagiarism unless I cite myself. So I give a reference to the previous publication and then use that material. So that is okay. But it needs to be cited, and ideally, even if it is your own paper, try to word it differently. So you shouldn't ideally be using the same combination of words. Now see, there is a IPR side to it, intellectual property right. Nowadays a lot of publishers are hiring IPR attorneys. So you never know, 10 years down the line, if you're an author and you try to self plagiarize from journal A, and it's your own paper, but you're publishing now in journal B, the IPR attorneys sitting in journal B's office may send you a notice and ask you to pay a fee, like a penalty. So that can happen. It's not like difficult. Many companies are doing that actively these days. They hire IPR infringement experts, and then they send out notices. So you want to stay away from those kind of things. The solution is really easy. Don't plagiarize. That's it. End of story. It's that simple. Now, what do you, so let's say, so we covered all the things that you need to cite, but what all do you really don't need to cite? Like, I'll give a very simple example. The sun rises in the east. Do you really need to cite that? Not really. So I don't think any researcher needs to go to a library and find the original paper in which this thing was mentioned, like the sun rises in the east. It's like a universal truth. So you don't need to cite that. Common knowledge, something as simple as that need not be cited. Now, many times what happens is people do not intentionally forget to cite, but they accidentally forget to cite previous publications. And in order to avoid that, because you really cannot keep track of 123 references, you may end up using 122 and then miss that one important Nature paper. So then people will label you differently. So in order to avoid that, you need to use some reference managers like EndNote or Mendeley. EndNote, you need to pay a fee. Mendeley desktop is free. And I think maybe we have a post on Mendeley desktop, right?
Yes,
we do have a post on Mendeley desktop. It's on the Inago Academy website. So you just need to log into inago.com/academy, and you'll see the post. So basically, if you keep track of all of your citations and manage them effectively, there's a lesser chance that you might miss on any one of those. So that's why managing citations by using effective reference management tools is pivotal. Now, there are some plagiarism checkers, like let's say we have an example here. There is a plagiarism detection tool called Authenticate, And people sometimes use that just to ensure that whatever they have written is original. Although really speaking, if you write something in your own words, there's a near zero likelihood that it will spontaneously match, even accidentally, with someone else's work. That's almost like saying that, just like I said before, random words combining into combining to generate Shakespearean literature. That's not possible. So stay assured, if you're writing something, if you're drafting something very original, the chances of that particular draft even accidentally matching with something else, the chances are almost nil. So you don't really need plagiarism checkers per se, but if you still feel the need, you can always check for some of these resources online. All right, so moving ahead, let's talk about reproducibility. So you can go through this definition. The US National Science Foundation has basically formulated a very comprehensive definition. But the idea is very simple. Let's say you are a researcher and you have managed to publish a paper, and you want others to be able to reproduce that. So let's say researcher A is in the United States and he or she has published a paper. Researcher B is in, let's say, Japan, and the person wants to reproduce the experiment. He or she must be able to accurately reproduce every single aspect of the experiment. So in order to do that, just like we discussed before, the materials and methods section, the findings, everything needs to be represented correctly. Only if that happens, the paper will be perfectly reproducible. Having said that, let's have a look at point number 2. All experiments that are reproducible need not essentially be accurate, because what happens is, let's say I'm doing an experiment, I repeat it thrice, I do it on Monday, I do it on Thursday, everything is fine, I can very easily reproduce it. But if the basic premise on which I'm basing the experiment is wrong, then there is really no point in having a reproducible set of experiments. Because if the basic premise itself is incorrect, then the reproducibility doesn't really add any value. I mean, of course, it should be reproducible, but that alone is not sufficient. You also need to be accurate, and you need to design your experiments carefully. So that's the fine line of difference. So that's why we wanted to specifically highlight this point, which is generally not highlighted by many other people. All right, so here's something about the reproducibility crisis. Now, the journal Nature conducted a survey, and surprisingly, they found out that more than 70% researchers were completely unsuccessful in reproducing experiments previously reported by other groups. And quite interestingly, many of these researchers were in fact not even able to reproduce their own experiments, which is really unexpected and shocking. So this is basically the reproducibility crisis, and it's a real thing that we are facing today. Now, how do we ensure reproducibility? So just like we shared some tips on how to avoid plagiarism, which is the highlight of the day, we are also trying to share some tips on how to ensure reproducibility. So you might want to access this fantastic Nature paper published in 2016. The reference is right there at the bottom. So basically, the very first and foremost thing is that you cannot simply report selectively, because that introduces bias. You have to present a complete and unbiased picture and then base your conclusions on that. But you cannot selectively hide data and then draw a conclusion. That is absolutely unethical. If you're dealing with numbers, of course, just like we mentioned before, you need to ensure appropriate statistical treatments. Then point number 3, and this gets ignored quite often because principal investigators are quite often busy in their labs, writing grants and everything, but that's not an excuse. Responsible mentoring is also a part of research ethics. So in fact, principal investigators need to find time to mentor their PhD students and postdocs and also their staff members adequately, so that all of these researchers ensure that whatever experiment they do is always going to be reproducible. I used to work at the UMass Medical School, and my supervisor there used to say this thing, the line in red, the sentence in red: an experiment done once is as good as no experiment, which is a really fantastic statement. Yeah, because I mean, that's very true. If something is just observed once, how can you draw any conclusion on that? You need to see it consistently, and you cannot run all the trials on the same day. You need to run a set of experiments, let's say on Monday, and then try to see what happens on the next Wednesday. Regardless of when you do it, the results should still be consistent. Then, of course, you need to document all procedures very carefully. Many times, people do not document their experimental protocols and procedures carefully, and one small, miscalculation or something that is missing can entirely alter the meaning of the protocol. So, all of us need to ensure accurate documentation, and it needs to be done in a very timely manner. PhD students, postdocs, staff members should maintain lab notebooks. And then, of course, the second last point, we need to ensure the incorporation of positive and negative controls. All of our experiments need to be designed very carefully. Now, I'm sure there are many PIs attending today's seminar. So we need to really cross-check our PhD students and postdocs lab notebooks and their raw data periodically, so that they do not get a chance to conduct fraud, basically engage in fraudulent activities. So as responsible mentors and principal investigators, all of us need to establish procedures for detecting fraud at source. So basically, you don't want that fraud to progress to a very a cancerous stage and the state of no recovery. You want to nip it in the bud and avoid the cancer from spreading. Now, just like principal investigators and researchers have their own responsibilities, journals and editors and reviewers also have their own unique set of responsibilities. Now, many journals do this all the time. They screen every single manuscript, and they try to detect, plagiarism, and they try to see if there is any plagiarized content. But the second one is also very important. Nowadays, you'll be surprised to know. By the way, did you see that manipulated image at the bottom? There's a bird with the face. There's a bird that has the face of a dog. So clearly, it's like it's a manipulated image, such a species doesn't exist. And if somebody tries to publish a paper, it will get rejected. So nowadays, on a related note, journals have very sophisticated tools to detect image manipulation. And you'll be surprised that many journals also have sophisticated tools to detect data manipulation. So let's say a researcher A sits in his lab and generates data in an Excel sheet. The journal will know that it's not data generated from a real experiment, because numbers that are generated from real experiments follow a particular distribution, whereas numbers that are obtained from fraudulent practices have a very unique pattern. So journals nowadays are growing smarter. So if you conduct fraud or engage in fraudulent activity, you'll get caught. So basically, the idea is simple: present your research findings accurately. Now, the Committee on Publication Ethics was basically constituted to address all of these issues, related to fraud and plagiarism. And you can go to their website and access the content directly from there. You can also visit this slide when you try to access the webinar video. So basically, they have outlined certain guidelines. They have stipulated certain guidelines, and these are all obligatory. So as researchers, it is our duty to comply with these guidelines. Okay, I think we are at the end of today's section. Now we have a quiz because the session needs to be interactive. So let's go for the quiz now. Here's the first question. All right, so is everybody ready? You just need to type your answers in the chat box. So let's say you plagiarize someone's work and you get caught. What is the likely consequence, or rather, what are the likely consequences? Select all that apply. A, the article is retracted with public documentation explaining why. B, the institute funding your research takes disciplinary action and probably asks you to leave. And C, your judgment and reputation come into question. So what's the right answer? Is it A, B, or C? You have to select all options that apply. All right, so you have a minute. Please feel free to type your answers in the chat box section. Okay, so yeah, we have started getting some interesting answers. Some people are saying that only A and B are correct, whereas some others are saying that all A, B, and C are correct. Yeah, so whoever said that all A, B, and C are correct, that's basically the right answer, because the article gets retracted with public documentation. There is a retracted stamp, bright red stamp on your paper. It stays there for life. The institute can fire the researcher, and then of course the reputation is at stake. So yeah, all three, A, B, and C. Next one. You're preparing a journal, a paper that involves a complex concept, and you're not able to find the right words to describe it. So you just look at another publication and directly borrow the material from there. So is it okay to use this explanation word for word without citing the original paper? Is the answer yes or no? So once again, feel free to share your answers in the chat box. All right, we have some interesting comments here. People are saying that they're enjoying the webinar. So thank you. Thanks for the kind words. And we also have some interesting answers. The answer is no. Yes, that's very true. You cannot simply, use somebody else's words or a combination of words or phrases. Those phrases or like combination of words or paragraphs have their own IPR. And of course, you have to read the material, understand the context, and explain it in your own words to your target audience. So yes, the answer is no. Okay, the next one. Now here's an actual case study. So we'll be considering three more case studies, and then we'll conclude for the day. And after that, of course, you can visit our website and send questions in our direction. We'll answer every single question. So let's go over this spot question. Jacob is a PhD student about to submit his first manuscript to Nature Medicine, and his PhD advisor unfortunately advises him to basically conduct research fraud and try to get the desired outcome. And Jacob refuses to do that, and he registers a formal complaint with the university administration. So can you identify the core issue here, and can you tell us if Jacob did the right thing? Okay, fantastic. I think we have some right answers being sent in our direction. It is indeed fabrication, and it is not the right thing to do. So yeah, Jacob did the right thing. And let's say, I'm not sure if there are any PhD students here, but if there are any, just stay assured, if your principal investigator tries to engage in research fraud or scientific misconduct, you can always report him or her to the administrative authorities. They'll give you a new thesis advisor. You'll have a new PhD advisor, so you don't need to worry about your PhD. So many people don't know that actually, So this is a very important aspect. So that's why we thought of highlighting that. All right. So next one, Dr. Margaret wants to submit her grant proposal, but she's also authoring a review article. and unfortunately she does not have the time to write the review article. So what she does is she goes and refers to a few very obscure journals and then borrows the content directly from those journals and then tries to quickly compile a review article. So is Margaret complying with the COPE guidelines? What do you think? Yes, so yeah, that's the right answer. No, of course not. She's not complying with the COPE guidelines because regardless of how obscure the journal is, you still cannot uh, you still cannot borrow content from any of those journals, even if it's an obscure journal. So yeah, she did not comply with the COPE guidelines. And after today's seminar, just make it a point to visit the COPE website. There are some really interesting, guidelines and stipulations. All right, next one. Dr. Jeffrey is trying to finish a set of experiments, and he's using a confocal microscope. But as usual, he's in a hurry, and instead of wasting time on the confocal microscope, he decides to alter the image digitally so that he gets the desired outcome. So, and interestingly, the digitally altered images look really fantastic. He now looks forward to submitting his grant proposal to a funding agency. So can you share your opinion on that? Is it a good option to use, let's say, Adobe Photoshop to get the desired traits in your confocal images? Is that a good thing? Yes, fantastic. So a lot of people agree to this. It's fraud, basically. You simply cannot use any kind of image editing software to digitally alter your data. That is a fraudulent activity. So yes, I'm really happy that most of the attendees were able to provide the right answers. So that's fantastic. And thanks for the interaction. All right. And then, so now we are almost at the end of the session. And what you can do is if you have any questions, I'm sure many of you will be having questions. So if you have any questions, you can direct them to our question and answer forum. And then we'll try to answer each and every question that is sent in our direction. So do you have any questions for now? Is there anything you want to ask us? You can let us know. Let's see if we have some time, we'll be able to answer those questions. Otherwise, you can always send those to direct those to our question and forum. Okay, somebody is asking us whether we'll have access to these slides. Yes, so we'll be, after today's webinar, we'll be sharing the link to this, webinar session. You will have access to the entire video. And of course, this will include the audio plus all the visuals, the PowerPoint. You can access them anytime. So yeah, of course, you'll enjoy access to the webinar. You have any questions for us? Okay. Okay, now Jason is asking us something about plagiarism checking tools. Now, Jason, here's the thing. When I tried to make a comparison, let's say there's Authenticate and there's PlaxScan. All of these are great plagiarism detection tools. There's also one more. It goes by the name, I think, was that Turnitin?
Yes.
Turnitin. So there is Turnitin, there is Authenticate, there is PlaxScan, and there is also one more. It's I think based Urkund. Urkund is one more software. Now, in order to make a direct comparison, what you need to do is you need to basically open up an Excel sheet and try to see what kind of databases these softwares have access to. So let's say basically Turnitin or Authenticate has access to Crossref, whereas Urkund doesn't have access to Crossref, and that's for sure. I know Urkund doesn't have access to Crossref, whereas Turnitin does have access to Crossref. So then in that case, that would be a better software. So there are many different plagiarism tools. So what you need to do is, before you order your product, just try to make a direct comparison. There are, literally dozens of such softwares available in the market. So the right thing to do is to make a direct comparison, see what kind of databases these softwares have access to, and then base your decision on that. Now, at present, we do not have access to those, Excel sheets in which we do like a comparative study. But if you can, put those points into a sheet and then make a comparison, you'll see that you'll arrive at the right conclusion. Okay, any other questions? Okay, somebody did their master's thesis with 3 research questions and objectives, and the person is asking us whether whether they can use each objective and submit for publication. Yeah, that is fairly common. That's exactly what happens during a PhD. You basically do your PhD work and get it published. So similarly, if you are doing your MA thesis, yes, definitely you can always publish. You can always publish that work in a journal, or present it at a conference and also have an MA thesis. So that is perfectly legitimate. In fact, that's how it works. So yeah, please feel free to go ahead and start working on your publication. Just make sure it is original, and just make sure the data are accurate, and then you're all set. Okay, so I think we are almost running out of time, and all of us, myself, Dr. Durga, Medha, we thank you for your time. Thanks for your enthusiastic participation. If you have any further questions, you can direct them to our question and answer forum. We'll be more than happy to address each and every question. And all right then, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.